I would like to delve deeply into what identity must and should be, and to relate that to what social structure must and should be. The two fundamental themes that we would address would be those of faith and responsibility, and I suggested that faith is the kind of courage that allows you to welcome the possibilities of the future with open arms. And I say possibility because the future is the manifestation of possibility into actuality. And the possibility of the future is what we contend with. The unknown treasure house of what could be is what we contend with. And given that that's what we eternally contend with, we might ask ourselves, how best to contend with that? And one answer to that is with the faith that is simultaneously courageous. We put ourselves on the line to act out the proposition that existence itself, being itself, and becoming itself are intrinsically good, and that it's incumbent upon us to act in accordance with that dictum, come hell or high water. And we look into the future and we cast upon the unknown landscape of the future a vision that provides us with hope and security, because that's what a vision does. And then we bear the responsibility of attending and acting in a manner that makes that hopeful and security-providing vision possible. And so then I would say that identity is the proper union of faith and responsibility. And then you might say, how does a proper identity unite faith and responsibility? And I would say that it does that in a subsidiary manner, in a hierarchical subsidiary manner. Now, if you're beset with conflict subjectively and in your society about what identity constitutes, you need a counter position that's well developed. So, identity is the proper union of faith and responsibility, and proper identity is subsidiary in structure. All right, so let's take that apart. First slide. Now I'm going to tell you a little story. It's a very simple story, but simple stories scale upward. And that's Jacob's ladder. Jacob's ladder, that's the eternal liana, the vine that unites the material and proximal realm of the earth with the eternal realm of heaven. How do we construct and climb Jacob's ladder? How do we comprehend it? When my son was 1.5 years old, I taught him to set the table. But that's not right, because when you're 1.5, you can't set the table. If you take a 2-year-old and you say, clean your room, to a 2-year-old who's in the midst of a room that he's distributed a terrible mess in, and you come back in 15 minutes, the room will be equally messy, and you'll ask your 2-year-old, why didn't you clean the room? And he will just look at you. And the reason he will just look at you is because he doesn't know what clean your room means. So you can take the 2-year-old, my son in this case, and you can say, hey kid, you see that teddy bear? Now he's happy about that request, because at 2, he knows how to see a teddy bear. And so he'll point his eyes at the teddy bear, and then he'll look at you, and then you can pat him on the head and say, good, and then you can say, go over there and pick up that teddy bear. So then he does that, and he looks at you, and then you can say, you see that space on the shelf there? He goes, yes. He said, you take that teddy bear and you put it in that space in the shelf. And he'll go over and put it in the space in the shelf, and then he'll look at you and you can pat him on the head. And then if you teach him 100 micro routines like that, very carefully, you can tell him to clean his room, and he knows how to do it. And that's how we build ourselves. And that's a little vision. It's a little vision. It's a micro vision. That the first vision is what the room would look like if the teddy bear was put in its proper space. Right? And it's not a glorious macro vision of how to unite heaven and earth itself, but it's the proximal beginnings of exactly that process. So we scaffold ourselves upward from the finite to the infinite. And it's the entire scaffold that constitutes our identity. So my son, he's 18 months old, I'm having him help set the table. I say, kid, you know where the drawer is with the knives and the forks? And he says, yes. I said, go to that drawer and open it up and pick out a fork. And so he goes and does that. And he can feel the fork because he has the drawer is above him, and he can feel the fork. And then he can come and say, bring it into the kitchen and put it on the table by the plate. And he can do that. And then he can do that with a knife. And then he can do that with a plate if you dare to let him carry a plate. And then he's learning what? He's learning to set the table, right? And then he sits at the table with the people that are there, and he's learning to share food, and he's learning to take turns, and he's learning to be hospitable, right? And so you can see that that starts to scale upward, right? And then he's hospitable, and he can take turns, so he's starting to be a good boy, a good kid. And that's part of taking his proper role in the family, which is a broader form of sharing, and the beginnings of his ability to play properly with others, and then to take his position as a potential friend in the community, and then to mature. And as he matures, the scale of his vision expands step by step until it encompasses not merely what he wants in the short term, but what would be good for him in the medium to long term. So the temporal scale of his vision expands, and not only so that he accomplishes or attains what's good for him, but so that he does that in a way that incorporates more and more other people into the expanse of his vision. And so by the time you start to operate as an adult, you can take responsibility for yourself. You know how to be hospitable. You know how to play with others if you're fortunate, or maybe you still have to learn that within the confines of your marriage. And then you take responsibility for your partner, and they do that with you, and the two of you take responsibility for your children, and that gives you the satisfaction and the adventure and the responsibility and the burden and the meaning of your family, and you embed that in your community, and you take responsibility for that, and you take responsibility beyond that for your town and for your city and for your state, and you do that all in as balanced and harmonious a manner as you can. And the spirit that infuses that entire hierarchy and that stands at the top is something like the spirit of goodness itself. And that's classically associated with what is highest, and that's traditionally associated with God. And the identity that you have is all of that stretching from lowest to highest at once.